you must be intelligent. It's essential, very essential, to have your credentials. But if you're block-headed like a mule, no one will employ a fool. You'll be the last one to be hired and the first one to be fired. Children go to school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you're gonna catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't follow idle companions or you will get burned. To earn, you got to learn. Illiteracy is man's greatest enemy. It's your duty, yes, your duty, stamp it out completely. Ignorance always impedes progress. Education saves you much distress. So learn as much as you can, for the nation's future's in your hand. Children stay in school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you're gonna catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't allow idle companions to lead you astray. To earn tomorrow, you got to learn today. It's a treasure, yes, a treasure beyond any measure. Just secure it, don't ever ignore it. To fight life's battles come what may, education lights up your way. Without it, you'll never get through. Success or failure now is up to you.
Promises to be just as educational and riveting as day one. Just a few housekeeping matters. Please remember to mute your device until you speak. Additionally, please note that questions should be submitted via the YouTube chat. Now, just a quick recap of yesterday's proceedings, which began with an opening session featuring remarks from the conference organizers, the principals of our respective schools, and the keynote address by Minister of Education, the Honorable Kay McConney, who shared the government's vision for the ideal person that the education system should produce. And that was a global citizen with Bajan roots and a Caribbean consciousness. The minister also actively engaged with our student presenters from Harrison College, Sydney Ford, Zenovia Storm Husbands, Giovanni Gittins, Emmanuel Seeley, and Jordan Gregg. And from Queen's College, Kayla Smith, Keon Sobers, Alexia Daniels, and Christina Wharton. Our student presenters made the case for the inclusion of financial literacy in the school curriculum and explored the connection between society, the economy, and education. Meanwhile, our featured speakers for yesterday were Doctors Janice Fournillier and Cardinal Warde, and our panelists were Donna Every and Curtis Gittins, who brought their expert perspectives on key aspects of education, including youth participation in reform, STEM education, entrepreneurship, and robotics. It was an enriching discussion indeed, and the recording of the proceedings is available on YouTube, and we invite you to revisit it as well as share with your networks. Today, we'll continue the theme, the future of education in Barbados, with the help of international educators, and we'll also hear from Barbadian professionals working in the gig economy. I'm quite looking forward to today's sessions. So we're going to begin with panelists from Sweden and South Africa. First up is Dr. John Rowe. Born in Cape
Good afternoon. My name's John Crow, and I'm speaking to you from Cape Town in South Africa. I'd like to talk to you today about a little bit about my educational experiences, particularly in Asia. I would like to look at three aspects of educational provision from my perspective. One, philosophical and institutional parameters. Two, teacher education, and three, classroom practice. Philosophical and institutional parameters. Within every country, there are institutions that reflect that country's value systems, either explicitly or implicitly. Education and schooling are no different. I have observed within my experience that successive cohorts of young people entering formal institutions of learning become subjected to a number of processes. These include regular academic assessments that rank and screen rather than nurture and creatively enhance learning. Failure then becomes embedded, and intellect becomes associated with school success. This has to be questioned. Number two, behavioral expectations that narrowly define good behavior as being quiet and attentive. Three, the adherence to curricula that makes more demands from memorization and rather less from intellectual endeavor. Once students have been processed by the system, they are then routed to outcomes that include the world of work, higher education, or indeed unemployment. Or should I say, unfortunately, unemployment. If the educational philosophy of a given country is to ensure the equity of educational provision, its delivery, and the attainment of optimal outcomes, then in my experience this has largely not been achieved. Let's move on now to teacher education. It's a very important aspect of education, or teaching and learning indeed. Teacher education. Let's accept that teachers have attained qualified teacher status. Then the importance of in-house measures to ensure good practice needs to be sustained. The system we adopted in China, which to me seems to be quite interesting, involved the following. The head of school would discuss the modalities of what was expected from each and every teacher in the school at the beginning of the school year. These included good lesson planning and preparation, and the importance of student engagement and involvement. Each teacher was observed by their head of department once per term, teaching a planned lesson. The teacher had to prepare the lesson and present it in written form to the HOD prior to the start of that lesson. After the lesson, the teacher and the HOD would then discuss the lesson, and the teacher would then have every opportunity to evaluate him or herself, whilst the HOD, on the other hand, would assess the lesson using given criteria. These assessments then formed a record of that teacher's progress and ultimately were used as promotion criteria. HODs in turn also had to be assessed, but this was done by the principal. And finally, the principal was certainly not immune from assessment, and this was done generally by directors of education. HOD meetings that were held fortnightly, and this is important, and recorded, were extensively used to promote good classroom practice. Importantly, these meetings were also used to ensure that teachers worked collaboratively in setting not only classroom tasks, but also tests and examinations. So the finer detail of test setting and certain classroom tasks were covered. This system worked greatly to the benefit of both the teachers and the students. Ultimately, a feedback mechanism involving students and their inputs would have been valuable or even ideal, but unfortunately, this did not happen on my watch. Let's move on now to classroom practice. My mantra has always been to teach individuals rather than class groups. I chose in my teaching to ensure that I discuss the progress of every student at least twice per term in a formal setting. Ideally, this should happen after the first few weeks of term and at the end of term after examination results. Perhaps this sounds onerous, but I found that time could be made for every student, and I found that they were also enormously appreciative of this initiative. Additionally, I was an advocate of collaborative learning. One example comes to mind, and this was the conception I had of a journey that had to be completed over a geographical landscape by a group of people who were stranded. This was posed to the class, discussed, and the class was then divided into groups, and each group was tasked to collaboratively set out their agendas in order to accomplish that task, and they were asked to do the following, or to involve themselves by doing the following: to discuss, to plan, to prepare, to keep diaries, to discuss survival skills, to discuss geographic skills, and to discuss and implement journalistic skills. Out of the 5-hour-long lessons I had with these students per week, we devoted 2 hours to what we termed the journey. My experience showed that the students became totally involved in this project, and all aspects, as stated above, of skill development were covered. Finally, in general terms, my Asian experience, i.e. in Malaysia, China, and Singapore, demonstrated the importance that policymakers gave to educational provision. Of note was the extent to which all the schools, in my experience, were extremely well resourced. Facilities included sports stadia and fields, comprehensive libraries. One example in Singapore was Raffles School, where the library was of university standard. Provision for clubs and societies, and of course, textbooks and classroom resources. Finally, on the administrative side, and I am here particularly referring to Singapore, it seemed that it was highly centralized, with little room to stray from not only a set curricula by the teachers themselves, but even heads of school could be replaced at a moment's notice to take up positions in the Central Ministry of Education. This was also generally the case in China, but certainly not in Malaysia. In Malaysia, heads seem to have more autonomy. You might, from the Western standpoint, think that principal autonomy is important because certainly the principals seem to set the tone of any given educational institution where they find themselves. Anyway, that's what I have to say at the moment, and thanks very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. We'll now move on to our second panelist before we delve into our discussion. So I'd like at this moment to introduce Anna-Lena Olsson, who's coming to us from Sweden. Anna-Lena is an experienced school manager, an international baccalaureate coordinator, international examiner, and high school teacher from Sweden, and she's the founder of Global Svenska Plus. Before moving to France in 2014, Anna-Lena was head of the International Baccalaureate Department at a well-known international high school in Sweden. She has a certificate of school management and leadership from Harvard University, as well as a Swedish Master of Education in Swedish and English Literature. Anna-Lena is a true lifelong learner who leads professional development workshops in Europe every year. Moreover, she is a curious member of the Principals Network at Harvard Graduate School of Education. Please welcome Anna-Lena Olsson.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anna-Lena Olsson. I'm founder of Global Svenska Plus, which is an online school providing mainly Swedish high school students living abroad learning solutions as they need to keep their mother tongue on a high level to be able to get back to the Swedish school system. I would like to start with thanking you for inviting me to take part of this conference. I look very much forward to being involved in the discussion after this presentation as well. I live in France, but was born and raised in Sweden, a 10 million democracy, 10 million people democracy by the Arctic Circle. Sweden is a rich country with a high standard of living and a good education system, which is free for all people living in the country as well as for the members of the European Union. Moreover, it's the third most innovative country in the world after Switzerland and the United States. Sweden ranks among the highest for telephone and internet access penetration, which is also evident in the school system. Digital tools are in daily use in home and in school, and the national curriculum states that children should be exposed to them already in preschool. In education, there is a pre and a post COVID-19. Most teachers and high school students used computers as an instrument for writing texts and showing pictures, but now it became the most important tool for teaching. Teachers were forced to adapt to the situation very rapidly, as lesson design and assessment are very different in online teaching. Teachers had now had to use their voices and body language in a different way to engage students, and they also realized that the digital classroom requires different structure and a different leadership. Soon, however, most teachers realized that the most important thing for successful education continued, as always, to be knowledge in the subject taught, well-structured lessons, clear communication, and of course, a true interest of young people's lives and well-being. I had, as an independent educator, spent 5 years developing online teaching when COVID-19 changed the world, and my teachers and students were therefore quite well prepared to go fully online compared to most colleagues and peers. People around the world therefore turned to me for support. And as I had already created online workshops for Swedish teachers working for me, I could quite easily adapt to some of this, adapt some of my material into short get started sessions. And the links to these Zoom workshops spread rapidly. In hundreds of teachers attended already in the first week. The second week of the school closure, Global Svenska Plus was added as a professional development provider to a new site created by the Swedish state to support schools in handling the consequences of the pandemic in Sweden. It was great to be able to help, but I couldn't spend more than a few weeks on giving free professional education to Swedish teachers. I had to focus on my own teachers around the world and of course our students. We were impacted by the virus just like everybody else, even if our students were used to being taught via Zoom by their Swedish teachers. They were not used to staying at home day and night. When the borders closed, many were separated from their loved ones in Sweden or elsewhere for a very long time. And this of course had a bad impact on their well-being and learning. In a stable world, where war, natural disasters, or other catastrophic scenarios are quite unlikely, experience and quantitative analytical data is often enough to make good decisions for the future. Sadly, that world is not ours. Global warming is a factor. We just came out of the world pandemic, and there is a war going on in Europe right now. I therefore think it is our duty to use the lessons learned during the pandemic to create scenarios that will help when planning for educational reforms. Remote teaching and learning online is one ingredient, but it requires good digital infrastructure such as fast internet connections and of course electricity. Access to electricity can be a huge problem in the future. Therefore, I think that a modern education system should prepare its students practically as well. In fact, all citizens should learn basic disaster preparedness, not only by theory. Buying batteries and solar panels might be a good thing, but by learning how people survived 150 years ago, when you know this, you are even better prepared in, for instance, the case of a natural disaster that has an impact on roads and buildings for a long time. Maybe all schools should teach students how to build simple dynamo generators and how to deal with shortages of clean water. Maybe the curriculum doesn't need rubrics on how to snare and cook a bird or a rabbit, but in some aspects, I think that we need to give more room for practical knowledge and vocational training when planning for a future school system, because we need more tools on hand to meet the changes of a changing world, and they could be found in the history as well as in the future. Curricular and pedagogical change like that would of course have an impact on the teacher training and professional development programs as well. But most of all, it would have to be built on a mindset that makes us all being more confident to change the way we think and work to adapt to current situations. Teachers must not only be knowledgeable and flexible in this future, but ready to lead change. But as I said earlier, we must not change too much. I believe that traditional teaching in school, combined with well-structured synchronous online teaching like Zoom teaching and a holistic approach to integrating technology could be key ingredients for tomorrow's successful school. If it's set in a society with a robust social security net, it will encourage students to be the curious inventors that society needs. In a perfect future, education should moreover be accessible and free, not only for children and teenagers, but also for adults who need to meet new challenges with new knowledge. I think that access to and production of good online teaching can and should be a tool to ensure quality in the future, irrespective of geographic and socio-economic factors. I also believe that societies and school systems that are well prepared for rapid change are more successful. In the future, countries, irrespective of size and location, might even come to treat education as an export in a manner similar to how I export Swedish from France. Provided there is internet and electricity, remote teaching, by, for instance, my model, means the location will not limit the quality of education. It will instead open new doors. So, I am doing this, even though I'm not at all an engineer or an IT expert. I'm a school manager and a high school teacher of literature. I do not often use YouTube or Instagram even. Like most teachers of Sweden, I have had the chance to develop my professional skills in different state-funded programs, but I have nothing special in that. So why did I start teaching online? The main reason is that my family moved to Nice in France in 2014. I'd left my job as head of the IB department at a big secondary school in Sweden. I was, to be honest, a bit bored in the sun on this terrace. When living abroad, I found that families in expat communities, as well as families working for the UN, World Bank, Foreign Ministry of Affairs, etc., they often move. And especially for teenagers in their high school years, this is a problem, as students who want to go back to Swedish educational system need Swedish language skills as well as good grades to be admitted. As I am raised a problem solver, I decided to try teaching using Skype, which is a Swedish invention, by the way, and was surprised how well it worked. 1 year later, I founded Global Svenska Plus, and I was lucky and had no problems attracting Swedish teachers to follow me on my new path of teaching, and the parents and the students were very positive too. Today, we have students at more than 60 international schools in 32 countries and 14 time zones. Our Swedish mother tongue program recently became partly state-funded, and as more than 700,000 Swedish citizens live abroad, the demand for our courses will probably continue to increase. My company was founded because I changed the way I had worked for many years to solve a problem in a situation that I had never experienced before. In a way, my journey can be seen as a product of what I try to describe as an educator for the future. Then is it something in my background as a Swedish educator that made me do this? I don't think so, really. The Swedish history of education is not different from other European countries. The curriculum is almost the same, but there is somehow an innovative mindset in Sweden, as we have so many inventors, as there are so many things coming from this small country. And I believe that we can find some clues in this subject, the crafts. It's a compulsory subject, and we have this together with home and consumer studies. This has been a part of the school system from the beginning. Everybody who has finished Swedish school has been taught how to cook, clean, wash, at least on a basic level. And they also know some carpentry, and they can make a t-shirt, they can do simple bicycle repair. In my opinion, the practical and aesthetic elements of Swedish schooling has helped people to be more creative and independent. And it is a holistic approach to education that foster individuals who are used to solve problems and to, in a way, manage themselves. Another very important part of the Swedish school system in fostering independent thinkers and lifelong learners is the idea that each pupil should, I quote, develop increasingly greater responsibility for their studies and develop the ability to assess their own results and relate these and the assessments of others to their own achievements and circumstances. One way of doing this in practice is student-led conferences and performance reviews instead of parent-teacher conferences. The idea behind this is found in the 1994 curriculum as a tool for learning. And today, most of these meetings takes place online, but emphasis is still on reflecting on the next step in learning and setting knowledge goals. And the meetings are normally based on a template from school in which the student, together with his or her parents, have prepared questions that they can use when the student lead this conversation about performance, goals and difficulties, and also, of course, strengths and weaknesses. And to be able to do this, you must reflect on your own learning. To finish the meeting and the conversation, you set new goals for what the student want to develop. I attended Swedish school in the 1970s and 80s and became a high school teacher in the same system in 1990s. I loved the Swedish school system, but left it almost 15 years ago to work with the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program. As many other countries, Sweden was impacted by new public management, and one of the things I disliked in the new system was the idea that students in secondary school should have final grades after each course of study. And to be able to give fair grades, the students had to sit national tests in several subjects every year and semester. It was very time-consuming, and valuable time that could have been used to plan good and interesting teaching was used for test preparation, marking and administration. My idea of teaching using why and how questions was changed for what and when, as it is much easier to mark, grade and give feedback on tests and papers asking questions like that. The IB system is quite different. It has, of course, tests too, but the final grades are set in the last semester, and you do it through final exams, which are marked externally by professional examiners. In my opinion, this is a better way of working together with the tutor, with the students, because in a system like that, the teacher is more of a knowledge provider and less of a judge. I know that Sweden are now going back to a system more like the IB system and more like the system we had before. And again, we can see that going back can sometimes be the same as moving forward to a better future. My own journey from being a traditional language teacher and school manager to become a modern educator started long before COVID. As you can understand, it is the results of a mindset taught by the Swedish education system, democracy, my parents, Ada, Pippi Longstocking, and also today inexpensive and good childcare and a tax system that does not hinder but rather encourage married women to work is another important factor. And of course, an important factor is grit, but that's another story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annalena and John, for sharing those insights from Europe and Asia. I'm now going to hand over to David Simpson to moderate our discussion between our two panelists. David?
Thank you. I was just trying to get my video on. Good morning to everyone. We do have a few questions to get us going in terms of the panel. So let me start with those. To you, John, if you're still there, I'm not seeing you, but if you're still there, what steps were taken to influence policymakers to make the changes that you referred to? Were there any consultations, and at what levels were these held?
We can try to send that to John by.
Probably logged off already.
No, no, they have some problems in South Africa with power.
Okay.
I can try to send that question via WhatsApp.
Okay,
and see if he's
we have for him so far. So if you can do that.
Okay.
Annalena,
what are the other two questions?
The second question was, my dad used to regale me with stories of him memorizing poems with long verses. With internet, students no longer memorize even 2 verses. What teaching techniques are required in our age to successfully promote memorizing long verses is the question.
And the last one?
And the last one, based on your experience working in different countries, what, if any, are the 3 main differences evidenced in terms of the repurposed approach to educational learning? Also, what would you say are the top 3 takeaways in terms of change management in this important area of education reform?
Thank you. And so then I would suggest you move on to Annalena. And Annalena, Annalena, if there are any questions that were posed.
I have a few for her.
No, just a moment. If there are any questions that were posed of John, it would be great if you could speak to any that you feel competent to do. So.
Thank you for your presentation, Annalena. We do have a few questions based on your presentation. How receptive were students to the changes made with respect to the transition to online learning, especially during the COVID pandemic?
The students that I have involved in the Global Svenska part, they were used to online learning. It wasn't a very big change for them. As I said in the speech, of course, it was different to stay at home all the time, and of course, it was sometimes difficult for some of them to get up in the morning and to do things if they were not really forced to do it by classes, by Zoom or other things. Because if you have the online learning, if you have the distance learning where you're supposed to write things and send it away, then maybe you could, when you're a young person, or even when you are 54, you could somehow feel that you could do that later. So that was a problem to all, I guess. But as we teach only using Zoom or Teams or other video conference tools, so we have our students in a schedule. They come, they do it on time, and they are meeting their friends in their groups, which was not a big problem to them. I know, however, that many, especially girls, as you asked about if there were any gender differences, especially girls, they when they work with distance learning and the online learning without the classes, they are supposed to write so much. That is what you do, and they write, and then they spend so much time writing that they do not sleep the way they should, whereas boys, this is only my opinion, had a tendency not to write as much. They might even write a little less than they should. So there were some differences in that aspect, I think. We could also see, at least from my point of view, we could see some differences in how you managed the social life outside school. As I work with people who do not live in their own country; they live abroad, and many of them have family, of course, friends, but mostly family living on the other side of the world, and they couldn't meet at all, even though you have these connections that we have now. It's not at all the same thing. You can't, as I sometimes say, I can't see your feet, I can't feel your breath. I mean, it's really different, even if it's better to do it this way than it is to just write some messages in somewhere. It's still we are human beings. We're supposed to be together.
The question focused on receptiveness of students, but what has your experience been in terms of the teachers on the other side of the spectrum in terms of online learning?
Most teachers hated it, at least from the beginning. At the beginning, they were so. The ones that I met in my workshops, some of them even panicked because they thought that now we had to be some YouTubers, we had to do the perfect videos with pictures everywhere, and we had to look like movie stars all day. And also they were very much concerned about how to use time. In normal classrooms, you might say something at the beginning, and then the students, they spend 20 minutes writing, and during that time you can correct some papers, or you could do different things. But now you can't do anything. You have to spend so much time preparing these classes, and then you have to be so extremely active all day, and then in the evening you're supposed to do it again, prepare for the next day. And this is, of course, very hard work. It's really, really hard work. And also you have to work extremely hard to meet all students so that you really communicate with each and every student. And when, in my workshops, I was really, I showed them methods how to do this, with giving each student a number of seconds to do things and to work with breakout rooms all the time, and also to actually do some other things than just showing YouTube links. For instance, there's nothing wrong if you are not good at using the whiteboards that exists, for instance, in Zoom. Then you can have a piece of paper, you can take your pencil, you can write things, you can draw things, and you can show it to the students, and they will understand. So you shouldn't do it I mean, the best thing is just to be a good teacher, is to be knowledgeable and to be active and energetic.
I think a big part of what came out yesterday, and even from your responses, is that there's a certain level of adaptation and change management that is required when it comes to the future of education. Another question was in terms of gathering evidence. Has any evidence been gathered in terms of the differences in terms of receptiveness to the changes and also the outputs or the results across the two genders? And you alluded to it a little bit just now, but would you like to expand a bit more?
When it comes to grades, at least within the IB system as well as in Sweden, we couldn't see a big change actually, but that was due to the fact that the national tests in Sweden, we didn't have them, so that was a way of losing that, of dealing with that. And also when we look at the international baccalaureate, they had some schools had the tests, most of them they did not have the tests in the first semester, and then after that the test, they do not have as many papers for the final tests as they have had, which means that it's difficult to see from data how much knowledge the students have lost, but I think they have lost some, yes.
Okay. John, welcome back. We have a few questions for you.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of
Okay.
this question, and I was thinking about them, but I found them quite difficult.
I think so too. I saw them.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
The first one was asking in terms of what steps were taken to influence policymakers in making the required changes.
Sorry.
Consultation.
Yeah. Before we get to that question, let's go on to the one about memorization.
Yes.
What was that question?
One said, my dad used to regale me with stories of him memorizing poems with long verses or passages, I guess we could say. With the internet and students being online, they no longer memorize even 2 passages or 2 verses. What teaching techniques are required in our current age with technology and so on to successfully promote the memorization of passages and work and verses?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Memorization is something that I've thought about recently, actually, and I'm particularly talking about memorizing the times table, for example. But one might ask, is there a place, first of all, is there a place for memorization? Because we know that certainly in the past and to a certain degree in the present, you are expected to a certain extent, regurgitate what your teachers have taught you in the classroom. So there's a degree of memorization in most kinds of examinations or forms of assessment that students have to do currently. And we all know that. I remember myself when I was at school, memorizing 2 exercise books of notes for my history O-level examination. And because I managed to memorize most of it and regurgitate all of it, I managed to pass that exam. But did I understand history? To this day, I'm still struggling in that subject, I think. But in terms of memorizing poetry, as this person referred to, particularly, and perhaps quotations from certain texts, and she's talking about certain techniques one might employ in the face of the kinds of social media that one can just access without having to memorize anything. Is there a place for memorization? Yes, there is probably. And I think if you use, I'm not sure if teachers still do this. I'm sure I use certain kinds of techniques in my classroom when I asked students to memorize certain passages of poetry when I was teaching A-level English. And I simply said, memorize those passages, and the students went away and did it. Now, you can use particular techniques in the classroom. You can perhaps think about rhymes. You can think about creating songs. You can think about certain other mnemonic techniques for memorizing. But I'm not sure if there's a huge place for memorization. Perhaps certain small aspects of what one would possibly want students to remember, to maybe quote a passage from a poem or a particular text. I'm not sure beyond that, aside from perhaps memorizing one's times table, that there is a place for memorization in education. That's what I have on that question. I hope that's
very well,
clear.
very well answered. So one of the other questions was, based on your experience working in different countries, what would you say are the 3 main differences, evidence in terms of the repurposed approach to educational learning? And what would you say are the top 3 takeaways in terms of change management in terms with respect to educational reform?
Well, that's quite a complex question. And I would think, let's take this idea of change management first of all. And I think a lot of and let's be very specific. When I was principal of particular schools in China and Malaysia, my teachers there had certain fixed ideas about what teachers do and what teachers are. And I introduced the idea of debating certain basic issues, such as what learning is, what teaching is, in the time allocated for staff meetings on a weekly basis. So people, my teachers had every opportunity to debate issues of that nature, to do with learning, to do with teaching, and to come up with certain ideas which may have been unfamiliar to them. Of course, I would introduce certain aspects of my teaching and my experience, but I found that the more I asked teachers to go away and think about certain things themselves and come prepared to talk about issues and to see things perhaps in various lights, various different lights, and to be involved in the process of actually thinking about how to approach certain aspects of the curriculum themselves and giving them the opportunity to make an input. I think this, to a certain extent, helped them when it came to taking on board techniques of teaching in particular, which may have been alien to them. And I'm particularly thinking of my situations I found myself in both in Malaysia and China in this regard. And there was obviously some resistance to change, but the important thing here, I think, was to take on board how teachers felt about how their approaches to education, their approaches to teaching, and to allow them to make their input and to lead the conversation, and also importantly, above and beyond what I've just said, to organize workshops which were teacher-led. And this helped us, I think, in terms of using different approaches in the classroom and getting some value from that. Okay.
Thank you. So, Annalena, I want to come back to you for a moment. Sweden is known for retraining as soon as students or workers complete one area of formal education. This requires a clear education policy as well as availability of adequate resources. How would you comment in terms of that query or suggestion?
Could I, is it in writing somewhere so I could check it again?
It may be on the YouTube, so let me just read it for you slowly again.
Yes. Mm?
The question is referencing Sweden being known for its ability to retrain students and workers as they complete various aspects of formal education. So the query, I believe the full question is, what type of education policy and resource availability is required to support this approach?
I'm not sure I can answer that one. Sweden is, as education is free in Sweden to everybody. It doesn't matter if you are young or if you're an adult. You can always go to university for free. You can have, it's a financial system that is very, I would say, generous. So the only thing that could keep you out of the system in terms of not going further is that you're not interested in doing it because you're happy with what you have. It sounds like I don't know, utopia, but it is in some aspects. What is it that keeps you from not being part of an education system? Well, of course, you might hate reading, or you might hate, and we also, of course, we need people who work with other things. We need vocational trained people as well. So I think there are personal aspects that refrain people from not going fully into the system. And of course, the need of the society. The society needs different. Everybody can't be good at citing poetry. It doesn't help when my car stops on the highway. So I'm not sure if that answers anything of the question.
I think the main response there is that it's not so much an educational policy in Sweden, but strong economic and public financing policy, which allows easy access to all levels of training, including retraining. So it's more of a finance policy than education. Education benefits from a strong financial policy.
Yeah.
We have some more questions coming in. John, if you could speak to the positives and negatives that you may have identified of principals having more autonomy in the Asian context.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hearing you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks for that question. Principals having more or less autonomy within the Asian context. I must say that there was a difference, I think, between the principals in Singapore in particular, and the principalships that I actually was involved in both Malaysia and China. In Singapore, the principal's role was, I think, proscribed, I should say, by the central education, very centralized education system. Principal basically represented, in my view, the Ministry of Education. And the principal's job, I think, in Singapore seemed to be to ensure that the dictates of the Ministry of Education were properly carried out. And the principal did not seem to have any direct engagement with students. Whereas in both Malaysia and China, my experience there, certainly my job was not only to ensure that teachers were fundamentally carrying out their jobs to the best of their ability, but I was obliged to teach classes, at least 2 classes. And I found that connection with classroom practice helped me to respond to any difficulties that teachers had in the classrooms themselves. So yes, in terms of my experience in both Malaysia and China, I found that the head teachers or principals played a huge role in ensuring that not only the curriculum was carried out purposefully, but also that every aspect of a teacher's life, a student's life, was in fact monitored. And this actually worked, in my view. The centralized Singaporean way of doing things, it really made the principal's job something of kind of president or job in a country who was not an active president, but somebody who merely was a titular president, somebody who didn't actually take part in the everyday running of the particular institution. So that's basically my view, yeah, on that question.
Okay, thank you. Annalena, would you recommend schools opting to introduce student-led conferences with parents and teachers, and what steps would we consider if we went that direction? You're still muted, Annalena.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's
I think it's a good idea to try to implement this, because the students they become aware of their own learning, and they must be more responsible in their own learning. And I think if you want to implement it, you should use first of all structure. And I know I sound so boring when I always talk about filling out these forms and doing that and the templates, but if you haven't got them, you haven't thought about what to ask, and you have to write down, I think, what you would like to say, because then you're forced to think about it, and you're forced to prepare. And you should also use a portfolio system, so that you can keep things, to have it in mind, or it's nothing that you should do just one day each semester to prepare for these interviews. But you should, the teacher will send reports. They will tell how you are doing in Swedish or maths or crafts, and then you get these reports, and you have your own views that you have in your portfolio, and then you sit with your parents at home, and then you're preparing comments on the report from the teacher, and also your own view of what you have learned, and why did I get an F in crafts? Was it because I thought it was a good thing of a good time for me to sit with my friends and playing with the I don't know, needles.
Getting found, but the picture.
I think it's a you're as a young person, because we start with this very early. You get some kind of self-confidence, because we listen to you. You get confidence from being listened to about your own learning, I think.
Yeah, thank you for that. How would you say, Annalena, that Caribbean territories can adopt or adapt the Swedish approach to learning when we consider many of the constraints that our region may face in terms of clear policy, inadequate resources, especially in terms of technology and so on, inadequate financing to fully equip schools with all that they need? How would you suggest we can vary or adapt the Swedish approach?
This is, of course, a big thing to discuss. Sweden was a very, very poor country in the 19th century. Actually, 1/3 of its population left for the United States, and in the 20th century, maybe because of the school system, because people were literate quite early, 1800. Sweden was supposed to be a literate country, and we had a system that fostered learners, I think, and that's why we have got so many inventors, in my view. These inventions, the engineers, this attitude, together with not being involved in huge wars, that is, of course, something that helped Sweden to be a prosperous country, to become a prosperous country. I know that this is not the case always in your part of the world, and you also have natural disasters, I guess, coming maybe more and more often, even because we have in our part of the world spent a lot of money in buying Mercedes and going by airplanes to different vacations and so many things, and I wish I could say that I have got the solution, but when it comes to, as I mentioned earlier, electricity is something that is, of course, very important to have, and that is something that you have to build on. And then when you have got the electricity, you have got the power, you have got the logistics for IT and the infrastructure, then I would say that is the most important thing when we look at the future, because that is not so, you could do things quite, it doesn't have to be so expensive when you do things online. For instance, you can have teachers working, if you're a small school, maybe you could teach students other schools as well, because you put them together in groups online. That is a good way of dealing with financial problems. But of course, as I said, in a perfect world, education is free. In a perfect world, it's a stable system, and you've got this economic resources, and that is not what we can see right now. But we have to look at the future as something that I mean, we can change. Of course we can. So why shouldn't you be the richest part of the world in 50 years? We don't know why you shouldn't, actually.
Thank you for that, Annalena, and all of your contributions. I think this panel has reinforced some of the concepts of yesterday, including entrepreneurship and innovation, because I think where there's lack of resources, we have to be as entrepreneurial and innovative as possible to bring a different approach and adjust what may be the status quo, so that we can extract the future we want from our education system and policies. So thank you once again, both to you, Annalena, and to John for joining from Sweden and South Africa, respectively. And we wish you a good day, and thank you for your participation this morning.
Thank you so much.
Back to you, Yahira.
Thank you, David. And thank you again to our panelists for those excellent questions and observations from our audience as well. We see that we have a lot of interest in how we can make our education system in the Caribbean and Barbados more student-centric and have more student participation. We're going to head into a 5-minute break very soon, but before we do that, I just want to make a plea or a plug for supporting our alumni associations. We've all been given the privilege of a sound education from our respective schools, and the next generation coming up will rely on alumni associations to aid in the maintenance and development of the infrastructure at the school, or in producing events such as this, which benefit the development of the student body, the teachers, and everyone, parents, everyone involved in the education of our youth. So please, when you leave school, or even now that you're in your professional lives, join and support your local alumni association. They do great work and are always looking for new members and those who would like to get involved. So please find out how you can join your local alumni association. At this time, we'll now take a 5-minute break. So it's 10:52 now, and we'll resume at 10:57. And then we go into our next session of panelists who'll be looking at the gig economy. So 5-minute break, and we'll be back at 10:57. Thank you.
Education, education, this is the foundation. Our rising population needs sound education to be recognized anywhere you go. Have your certificate to show, to enjoy any kind of happiness. Knowledge is the key to success. Children go to school and learn well, otherwise later on on in life, you're gonna catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't allow idle companions to lead you astray. To earn tomorrow, you got to learn today. For employment, yes, employment, you must be intelligent. It's essential, very essential to have your credentials. But if you're block-headed like a mule, no one will employ a fool. You'll be the last one to be hired and the first one to be fired. Children go to school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you're gonna catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't follow idle companions or you will get burned. To earn, you got to learn. Illiteracy is man's greatest enemy. It's your duty, yes, your duty, stamp it out completely. Ignorance always impedes progress. Education saves you much distress. So learn as much as you can. For the nation's future's in your hand. Children stay in school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you're gonna catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't allow idle companions to lead you astray. To earn tomorrow, you got to learn today. It's a treasure, yes, a treasure beyond any measure. Just secure it, don't ever ignore it. To fight life's battles, come what may. Education lights up your way. Without it, you'll never get through. Success or failure now is up to you. Children go to school and learn well. Otherwise, later on in life, you're gonna catch real hell. Without an education in your head, your whole life will be pure misery. You're better off dead. For there is simply no room in this whole wide world for an uneducated little boy or girl. Don't allow idle companions to lead you astray. To earn tomorrow, you got to learn today.
Welcome back. For I'm going to invite now Sharon Rose to facilitate an exciting part of our program. Sharon Rose, please go right ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Just a small correction. My name is Sharon Gittins.
My apologies.
No problem, no problem. And I will be facilitating a draw based on students who attended yesterday's day of the conference. And the winners of this draw will have free coaching, will get a free coaching session from Island Advantage, which is a not-for-profit started by a QC alum. And they help with academic success and scholarship access. So I have the list of names in a barrel. I'm just gonna mix it up. So our first winner is Sydney Ford from Harrison College. Congrats, Sydney. Our second winner, let's see here. Talia Scantlebury, also from Harrison College. And now to the third winner. Abigail Riley, another student of Harrison College. To a fourth one. Ajani Headley from Queen's College. And our final winner, Gabriella Green from Harrison College. So our winners are Sydney Ford, Talia Scantlebury, Abigail Riley, Ajani Headley, and Gabriella Green. Congrats to our winners. And I'd like to thank Island Advantage for offering the free coaching sessions to these 5 students.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sharon. And thank you again to Island Advantage. So let's move into our next session. We've had a vibrant discussion this morning about the education system in various parts of the world. And now we're going to delve into a job market trend that is growing in importance, particularly in our digital world, and that is the gig economy. So what is that precisely? Well, according to a quick Google search or quick Google definition, this is a labor market characterized by the prevalence of short contracts or freelance work as opposed to permanent jobs. And in today's economy, as I said, that is becoming more and more prevalent. Today, we are thrilled to welcome 2 gig workers who will share their experiences and insights with us. First up is Jonathan Norgrove. From the time he could hold a pencil, Jonathan was drawing and telling outlandish stories with his art. He went on to study graphic design at the Barbados Community College and subsequently traditional animation at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, New York for 4 years. While living in New York City, Jonathan had the pleasure of working on a Jim Henson animated production, Sid the Science Kid, as well as a brief stint at Little Airplane Productions before returning to Barbados. Back home, he taught graphic design, animation, and video editing at the University of the West Indies and became an illustrator, animator, graphic designer, and video editor for Red Advertising and Marketing Limited, where he was responsible for design solutions on a bevy of large brands. He is currently a freelance animator and graphic designer, working under his personal banner, Studio Moose. Please welcome Jonathan Norgrove, who will share about his experience in the animation industry. Jonathan?
Hi guys, my name is Jonathan Norgrove and I've been a professional animator in Barbados for about 12 years now. Saying that got me feeling real old, so we'll just move past that as quickly as possible. I trained as a traditional animator at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and today I want to go through the various disciplines you can pursue in the field of animation. Over my years in the business, I've found that it can be easy to both oversimplify and overcomplicate the medium of animation in a number of ways. People can feel like they get pigeonholed into either one very specific thing or become very overwhelmed thinking they need to be amazing at every facet of the art form. And there's certainly a lot of merit to those fears. I totally understand that from personal experience, especially when I was a student back in, cave person days.
Cave person days.
Which is why I think it's helpful to break down the different principles within animation as a whole and focus your vision on one or two things you truly want to get into and get good at. There's a tendency, not just with animation, but with art in general, for people outside of the field to not quite understand the process. Not that it's their job to understand the process, but it is helpful for you and them to make sure they know what's going on so that they don't have unreasonable expectations. People tend to think that drawing is fun, and it is, but by extension of thinking that it's fun, they also think that it's easy, and therefore subconsciously they harbor this idea that it isn't really work. And if it isn't really work, then you as an artist should be able to get things done quickly and really easily. And of course, we know that this couldn't be farther from the truth. The actual truth is, all these shows that we love, all these lavishly animated commercials, films, video games, they're all created by teams of people. Sometimes in Disney animation, there's an entire team of animators responsible for animating a single character. Sometimes these teams are spread across several different countries, continents, and cultures, communicating and working toward a singular goal. As a matter of fact, most of what we call American animation, especially throughout the 80s and the early 90s, I'm dating myself, but
Cave person day.
shows like Transformers, G.I. Joe, He-Man, the animation for those shows were outsourced to animators, mostly in Japan. Even within, let's say, the last 10 years, shows like The Legend of Korra, Gravity Falls, The Witcher, they're all animated largely in South Korea. The Netflix animated show Arcane is animated in France in conjunction with other studios across Europe and the United States. Most Japanese anime, for instance, is of course done in Japan, but these days a lot of it is outsourced to independent animators across the globe who've been showing off their skills on social networks like Instagram and Twitter, for instance. Some backgrounds for shows like Rick and Morty were done here in Barbados, as a matter of fact. All this to say that it's more often than not an enormous team effort. It's a ton of hard work. It's helpful for clients to know this information because then they understand that in order to get a quality animated product, it will take a lot of time.
Levi vs. Kenny, which took a month to animate, and Levi vs. the Beast Titan, which took a month to storyboard and 3 months to animate.
And it will take a lot of money. But it's also helpful for you to know this because you'll be able to negotiate the time that you need to do the best job that you can. You'll be properly compensated for your work. And most importantly, it can free you of the expectation of needing to be this one-person army, especially if you're an independent animator just working completely by yourself. So this now is where understanding the various disciplines comes in. Very few people excel at everything. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. So when studying animation, it's good to pick a focus and find out which part of the team would best suit your skills. Now, when people think about animation, the first thing that truly enters their mind is character animation, making the characters themselves act and move around. There are different ways of doing this depending on what form of animation you're using. If you're doing traditional 2D animation, it requires drawing individual pictures or frames and then flipping through those frames to create motion. Then there's CGI animation, or computer-generated imagery, where you sculpt a character almost like you would with clay, except in a computer, and then you move that character around. We mostly see this in 3D animated films or with larger-than-life characters in live-action films. And we especially see it a lot with video games. More recently, there is puppet animation, where you essentially draw a character, give them joints, and then you move their limbs around in programs like After Effects and Toon Boom. This is done commonly today for shows like Rick and Morty and Star Trek The Lower Decks, but was even done without computers as far back as the 1920s, where a German woman created the first animated film using paper cutouts, and also predating Disney's first animated film by a good 11 years. So for the sake of this example, we'll delve into traditional 2D animation, because even within this specific discipline, you'll find different teams. There are keyframe animators, artists who draw the major poses within a single motion. Then there are in-betweeners, artists who then quite literally draw the poses between those major drawings that the keyframers did. Then you have the cleanup artists, people who go back over the rough work of the keyframers and the in-betweeners to make sure all the outlines are crisp and each drawing is on model. And then of course we have the coloring department, tasked with going through and coloring and shading each of those frames once they've been cleaned. Now, I just mentioned the idea of keeping drawings on model. What does that even mean? That takes us to the next discipline that I wanted to discuss, character design. Someone has to decide what these characters are going to look like. Will the style be realistic or cartoonish? What kind of clothes will they wear? How many belts do they have? The character designer decides all of this and then puts a sheet together with the character in different poses to help the animators stay on model. Or rather, draw the character in the same way every time, or at least as much as humanly possible. Okay, anyway, enough of all that. What about the script? What are these characters going to say? What about your team of animators? How will they know what each scene is going to look like? This is where the disciplines of screenwriting and storyboarding come in. Before we even get to animation and character design, someone has to come up with the idea to write the screenplay, plan out the dialogue, the fun gags, the action sequences, and after that, another team has to draw out a rough idea of how each of those sequences will actually look. Storyboards are basically like a rough comic version of your animation. These days, this process can bleed into also creating what they call an animatic. This is essentially a video version of the storyboard, usually created once the voice acting and some of the music is completed. This also helps to give the animation team an idea of the timing behind each sequence. How long it takes for a character to run from one place to another, or slap someone in the face, or kick someone in the balls, or whatever else. Now, while the storyboards and the animatic are passed off to the animators, and they're doing their job, there is usually another equally important process going on in and around this time. Background artists are equally just as essential to the process. Layout artists as well, for that matter. They're not just designing the backgrounds for each sequence, but they're also creating the mood for the show itself, the atmosphere for the show. This brings me to the final disciplines that I'm going to cover here, and that's effects animation and digital compositing. These are the two processes which truly make the animation sing. They enhance the character animation and complete the overall mood and tone set up by the layout, background artists, and art directors. Usually all of the colored animation and backgrounds are put into a program called After Effects that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and most of the digital compositing, things like light from a flickering candle or light from the moon or sun rays, are all added in that program. And of course the thing is, this is all nothing without someone to direct the entire project. Someone who is good at making sure every department has enough time to do what they need to do, and make sure that the overall vision is coming together as consistently as it should at the end of the day. Now, the beauty of animation school is that you get to dabble in a little bit of everything. This is where you get to figure out what aspect of animation you like the most. Animation is a huge, wide world, and if you're interested, it's easier to get into it now than it's really ever been at all. So with that, I'm gonna let you all go, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you for pulling the curtain back and showing, how some of the shows that grace our screens are made. So as we continue to explore the gig economy, let's now hear from Dr. James Carmichael. An alumnus of Harrison College, Dr. Carmichael is what we describe as a 21st century Renaissance man, being a technologist, a researcher, an award-winning educator, a creative writer, athlete, and a linguist. His love of computers and foreign languages led him to pursue studies in both the arts and sciences, and eventually resulted in earning his doctorate and Master of Science in software engineering from the University of Sheffield in the UK. This is after having earned undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, a Bachelor of Arts in French and Master of Arts in Spanish from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus.
All of you.
He has recently served as Associate Professor of Computer Science at the University of Fujairah in the United Arab Emirates. Currently, he teaches computer science at the University of Nassau in the Bahamas. His research endeavors lie in the domains of algorithm development for computerized speech processing, as well as investigating novel techniques to improve internet-based information retrieval. Please welcome Dr. James Carmichael, who will help us to explore the value of the gig economy. Dr. Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Ms. Archibald. That was a very, very flattering opening introduction, and wow, I hope we can live up to it. You know what? I think I'm going to start. Let's have a little bit of fun, shall we? We just had a very, very captivating talk about animation, so maybe we should start there, not with animation as such, but shall we say with an idea of what of a gig worker. Let's have a look at a gig worker, shall we? Why not? So hang on there. Let me just go here a second. And let's just go here a second. All right, listen, come on. We all substitute teachers. I'm to school for 20 years in the inner city. Don't even think about messing with me. Y'all feel me? Let's roll here. Quellen. Let's say Quellen now. Don't say Quellen here?
Do you mean Jacqueline?
Balake. Where is Balake at? There's no Balake here today. Yes, sir. My name's Blake. Okay, now what we just saw there was a bit of a comic skit, as we say. But remember when I said to you, I would show you a gig worker. Of course, you're expecting perhaps a musician. But if you paid careful attention to what was said just now, you realize that that gig worker was a teacher. But a teacher unlike anything we've ever had in Barbados, because Barbados and most of the Eastern Caribbean, well, the whole Caribbean really, we don't do substitute teachers, do we? If a teacher is absent or late or sick, what do we do in Barbados? We say, well, you got the whole strain. In the UK and the USA and in France, you have teachers who have careers in simply being substitute teachers. When people are sick, when teachers are sick, these guys come in, teach for a day, 2 days, and then they're gone. Now that's the whole thing about, I'm gonna start it here. That's the whole thing about this idea of can gig equal big? Seriously, can gig be a big part of the world economy, and I would say more so the Caribbean economy. So as I said here, what do we see here? We see on the right-hand side, well, that's a classic gig worker, an Uber driver. So we know about him. Notice also that there is somebody there, an agent, who is phoning in a gig. Yeah. As we heard just now from the previous speaker, we have programmers, animators, also the people who, they do their own gig too. They send in software, they send in source code from all over the world. It's not uncommon to have Indian software programmers sending in their stuff to America, which is literally halfway across the world. How about this guy in the lower left-hand corner? Ah, a political consultant. Is that a gig worker? Well, yes, by definition. Do you remember? Well, you probably do. I'll be a bit controversial here. In the recently held elections, or the elections of January this year, there was a certain campaign strategist who was chastised for, let us say, jumping ship. And a certain Hartley Henry, a fellow political consultant, said, this person is a consultant. They can sell their services anywhere. That's how they earn their living. That's how they earn their gigs. Who would have thought that? So what's a gig? Well, according to the Oxford Online Dictionary, a gig is any job, especially one of short or uncertain duration. And the gig economy, a segment of the service economy based on flexible, temporary, or freelance jobs, often connecting clients and customers through an online platform. So, by the way, how is a gig worker any different from a self-employed person? Well, by definition, a self-employed person does not work for anybody, but he deals but somebody else. So a self-employed person deals directly with the customer. That's not the case of a gig worker. In fact, a gig worker is more like a freelancer. In other words, then, a gig worker is hired by somebody else. A gig worker, unlike a self-employed person, a gig worker is hired by some employer. The only critical difference between a gig worker and the standard regular worker is that a regular worker is on payroll. He gets his pension, or he will get his pension when the time is right. He will get his health benefits. He will get his vacation pay. A gig worker gets none of that. A gig worker is a freelancer, a kind of a mercenary, if you may. In fact, the term freelancer has military origins. It was first applied to 13th century mercenaries who had lances. So they had lances that they could use. They were free to use their lances how they liked. So they were freelancers. Sounds crazy, but true. So a gig worker is the nearest freelancer was what gig workers were called before they became gig workers. And by the way, how did gig get so big? It seems like just what, last 2-3 years, it was gig work and stuff like that. Well, we gotta blame a little fellow called Mr. COVID-19. During the 2-year COVID pandemic, 114 million people worldwide lost their jobs. That's according to the International Labor Organization. Think about that. 114 million people lost their jobs. Many of them never got those jobs back. And in fact, many of them did not even want to go back to gigging to make a living. I know personally that when I was living in Dubai, Emirates Airlines laid off over half of their pilots and their air hostesses. Staggering. And of course, now that the economy is picking back up again, they want them back. And some are saying, no, we are going to be the masters of our own destiny. But we don't want to be totally self-employed. We still want to maybe hire ourselves out, but to people who we have no allegiance to whatsoever. And on that note, there are, well, of course, who is the ultimate or the iconic gig employer? Uber, right? You know, you have Uber drivers, Uber Eats, Uber everything. Is it nice to work for Uber? Let's find out something here a second. So I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna pause this presentation for a second. And I'm going to just go here. I'm gonna just go here to, right, here we go.
The Supreme Court has ruled that a group of Uber drivers must be treated as workers rather than self-employed, a decision which means they could be entitled to minimum wage and holiday pay. The decision marks the end of a 5-year legal battle case, could have implications for many others. With more, here's our transport correspondent, Caroline Davis.
The Supreme Court unanimously dismissed Uber's appeal.
Yes. Brilliant. The years of 20. Today, outside the Supreme Court, Yasmin and James heard the decision they've been waiting for, that when driving Uber, they were workers, not self.
I think it's sentence contemplated these big battles. Workers can fight. Yes. They spent millions of pounds trying to feed workers. I mean, it's reprehensible that they've done this, but I'm just so delighted, thrilled, and relieved.
Worker status is not the same as an employee, but it means that they have rights to a minimum wage and holiday. The rights training which met with passengers, Uber has always claimed it's an intermediary. That was rejected by the Supreme Court. Uber say this judgment only applies to the drivers that first brought the case in 2017, not to every Uber driver in the country, because Uber say they've made changes since then. Some drivers and lawyers would disagree. Today, the court set out the reasons why it thought these Uber drivers were workers, which included the fact that Uber set the pay and the contract without any say from the drivers. How today's verdict will affect today's drivers and other workers will be the subject of future court cases.
Okay, now that's interesting. So Uber tried to have the best of both worlds. They wanted to say, oh, but anyway, Uber claims, and they're probably right, Uber is a taxi company, basically, that has no taxis. Uber has no taxis, not even one. What is Uber actually? Uber is simply gig procurer. What's that exactly? A gig procurer is somebody who gets a gig for you. So what Uber says it is, Uber simply connects drivers to those who want to ride. That's all that Uber does. Well, according to the courts of the UK, this was a case in February of 2021. They said, no, Uber, you are an employer. And if you are an employer, please give the correct and requisite rights to vacation, rights to pension, rights to medical coverage. Please do it. But that's the problem actually with this gig economy as it is expanding. They are becoming, well, that's how I suppose some employers are. This is the big challenge of going gig, that we must not go inhumane where we go gig. And to get back to our slides here. Sorry, let's just go back quickly. So when we are thinking about going gig, it's not only a matter of technology, internet and stuff like that, because basically Uber is an internet company. Uber wouldn't exist were it not for the internet. A big part of the gig economy is for the most part internet based. So how do we think gig? How do we think gig? Because it demands a different mindset than what went before. There's a certain Liam Nielsen. I'm sure all of you have seen that movie Taken. He said, he has a job that demands he possess a certain specific set of skills. Gig workers must also possess a certain specific set of skills. By the way, this is already being done for lawyers. At UE's, at the University of West Indies Law School, the Hubert Law School, do they learn more law? No, they learn how to manage a business. There was a very interesting talk yesterday where some Harrison College students presented, learning about financial management. Gig workers must do that too. They must learn how to manage a business as a self-employed person. They must also learn other skills like contract negotiation. Those taxi drivers would have done well to have learned how to negotiate contracts, because don't forget, gig workers will have contracts. And of course, they also need a bit of conflict resolution and other what are called emotional soft skills, which are very, very important. So don't think about going big with gig. You must also think about thinking gig, getting into that gig mindset. So another thing about this gig economy, don't forget that nowadays in the information age, the only constant thing is change. I mean, do you all remember when Microsoft Office first came out, or when the Windows operating system first came out? Windows XP, and now we are what? Windows 11. Roughly every 2 years, something new comes out from Microsoft. The pace of change it hurts my head, but that is the world we live in. That's the information age we live in. So gig workers must engage in lifelong learning, and continuous skills upgrading is a must. But let's know, there's a little interesting thing here, which is very often people think, oh, I'm a regular worker. I have my 9-to-5 job, my pension plan, my health benefits. Will these gig workers come and take our jobs? In other words, will gig workers become, what can we say? Will gig workers become strike breakers? Is it possible? Well, I put it to you that in the Caribbean context, especially the Barbadian context, that need not be and should not be. First of all, how do we pay gig workers? I would say, for example, that gig workers should be paid at a higher rate to cover the cost of them having to sort out their own insurance plans, vacation pay, health benefits, and so on and so forth. So, for example, if you're in teaching and you are going to be a gig teacher, if that ever happens in Barbados, then gig teachers, you would have to first of all work out the pay of a regular teacher. And that's pretty easy. I mean, you just basically take the person's gross salary and divide by 30 days. So take the monthly gross salary, divide by 30 days, and that would be a daily rate. And then I would suggest on top of the daily rate, adding on another 10%. So that 10% which the gig worker will earn in addition to the regular worker. That's saying, Mr. Gig worker, Mr. Gig teacher, Mr. Gig programmer, you have to sort out your own health insurance coverage, your own vacation pay. So for that, we give you a little something on the top. Now, there's a price to pay. Number one price is gig workers don't have to have loyalty to anyone but themselves. I mean, they should be professional, but the idea of workplace loyalty, nobody is loyal to them. So go figure. So gig workers, workplace loyalty, employer loyalty is optional, not required. As a matter of fact, in many cases, like gig teachers, substitute teachers, they are not, or they should not be given certain administrative jobs, like being a yearhead, because a yearhead is a position that requires a certain amount of continuity, and it would tie a gig worker down to a specific school, and that's not what should happen. By the way, gig workers, sorry, employers will know if they will focus their workforce on gig workers, there will have to be some type of gig procurer. In the old days, we used to call them employment agencies. You know, so an employer would call up some agency and basically get a person, say, hey, I want to have a programmer or what have you. So we will have to have a new breed of entity, the gig procurer. As a matter of fact, a gig procurer might work across several different types of jobs. Another thing, please, people, please, please, please. You know the old routine in Barbados and most countries around the world, when you're 65, you stop being alive. Got to go and retire. Why? If you're a gig worker. Now, of course, governments, they want you to retire for several reasons. They want the new members of the workforce who are coming in to get jobs. You can't have, you know, James Carmichael hanging on till he's 80 and stopping some youngster from getting a job, can you? But that's the whole issue. If James Carmichael goes from being a teacher to now being a gig teacher, a substitute teacher, I will not be there competing with youngsters like David Simpson. No, it's when, if he's a teacher, when David Simpson is sick, you know, feels a bit under the weather, and he can't come to work, they'll call old, dithering James Carmichael, and whether he is 60 or 600, the only thing that should matter is James Carmichael fit and capable of doing the job? So a gig worker should have no age limits. End of story. The only criterion should be competence. Remember, the important thing is not to find a steady job. The important thing for the gig worker is to find steady work. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed my presentation. That's all there is to it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, James. I certainly found that a very interesting presentation, having dabbled in the gig economy myself from time to time.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
So now we're going to have some questions. I'm going to invite David Simpson to once again come back and moderate between you and Jonathan as we delve into this very interesting topic. So please, David, go right ahead.
Thank you, Yahira. Thanks, of course, to Jonathan and James for their insights. Very interesting indeed. James, I want to start with you and go back. You alluded to it briefly in your presentation, the issue of loyalty. I think over the past few years, and especially since COVID and people having the time to reflect and so on, but definitely in the younger generation, loyalty to employer is not what it used to be in my generation or generations before. I think it's safe to say that employers are lucky if they get 5 years out of any current employee in current generation. So my first question to you then would be, taking that position, how would you advise that employers should embrace the whole concept of the gig economy to keep their companies viable and sustainable in terms of access to services and skills?
Okay, that's an excellent question. I think the first thing to realize is that not every company can gig. Some companies will be able to gig partially. Now you go back to a type of organization which you know very well, schools, universities, especially universities, because in the UAE, in Dubai, you often have a curious mix of what are called adjunct professors and full-time professors. And similarly, in a school, you have this idea of the guiding the world teachers, the year heads, the principal, you know, those guys who are the pillars of school X and school Y. Now, there are certain types in any company. You have, let's say, administrative staff. You have your line managers, your year heads, and so on and so forth. You cannot make a gig worker into a line manager for obvious reasons. He may not be there the next day or the next week. So admin people should be on payroll and should be on permanent staff. When it comes to, I would call it the foot soldiers. So, for example, if James Carmichael, getting old, getting past it, he falls sick at his workplace, you know. Now there is a need to have somebody there. There needs to be a warm body teaching those students. Now, what happens, let's say, in Barbados right now? Whole strain, boss, whole strain. You know what that means? That means that you're a regular teacher. You were so looking forward to, you were looking forward to having your 3 free periods for that day. No longer. In comes the deputy headmaster and says, "Oh, Dr. Carmichael, so sorry, but Miss Archibald is sick today. So if you don't mind, of course I mind. But what can I do?" And it's very prevalent among Caribbean institutions. They hate the idea of the gig worker. They just hate it. Whole strain, boss, whole strain. That mindset has to change. The idea in schools, universities, even in regular, what do they call it, regular companies, the idea that you have somebody who comes in to fill a gap, a temporary gap, that idea must change. What happens is that, for example, the Ministry of Education, they will probably blow a gasket if you had to have workers, or where would they get their budget to employ sub-teachers? How would you pay them? Oh, yeah, it's going to be a headache. Oh, my goodness, But that is important. The whole idea of the gig economy is that there is room and there is space for the hired gun. I mean, that's an awful term, We teachers are, in local parentis, we are hired guns. We are like priests. No, we aren't. Yes, we have a duty of care, but there's a possibility of gig work in that way. in the gigification of the economy. You make room for the gig worker using those pay rates that he spoke about. I think I'll let my animator jump in here, as he was saying.
Thanks for that, James. Jonathan, I was exposed to animation back in 2011 or 2012, I believe it was, where we were making strides to promote the industry locally. Traveled to Los Angeles and met with somebody who's who in the business. And some studios started up in Barbados, some in Trinidad, which are still going to my knowledge. We have a question here. Somebody's asking about students who want to major in animation. As an art teacher, they're drawing, which is what they love. But if animation could be taught from class 3 or 4 in primary school, that would be great because they would have the basics of design and inference and juniors of primary school. So the question, therefore, behind that comment is how can you, and I guess other animators, assist the ministry to implement the teaching of animation in schools, I will say. The person specified primary schools, but I think we need to look at primary and up, or maybe even nursery level and up. And in answering that question, Jonathan, can you make the link between art and animation for us?
Sure. Well, I suppose to answer the first question on how we can actually implement that in schools as young as I wouldn't say infants, that might be a little too young, but primary school at least. At least there, it would be a little simpler to teach animation, just in the way of showing them how to make a simple flip book, because children are already pretty curious, right? And from the time they see a cartoon, their brains are already kind of or at least the ones that are interested, are very much well, how does that work? How do you make that exactly? And even back then, I remember making flip books myself, getting those little notepads that you could just flip through, and I would just draw stick men on it in different poses and flip it and just see how that stuff moved, how it worked. So if artists like me and a few of the others working in Barbados today at various studios and so on were to kind of start a program where we got children to kind of explore in that sort of way, we could definitely, at least start the conversation of getting that stuff going in the islands. I suppose it is a little difficult at a higher level because that starts to include technology and an infrastructure that we may not quite have yet. Even in my video, you see people working on what they call Cintiqs, which are these giant screens that you just draw on. And imagine we had to buy how many Cintiqs would we need to put into all the high schools in Barbados to make that work. I'm not entirely sure. Someone smarter than me will have to figure that part out. But wait, what was the second question? Sorry.
The second one was asking you to link art and animation. The reason I asked the question is I am not certain that everyone makes a connection between the two. So I want you to clarify if there needs to be, or if animation is a separate skill or talent that right now at 47 years old, I can decide I want to be an animator without having done any art and without being any type of artist, to be quite honest. So that's why I asked about the link between the two.
Sure. It is interesting because, and this is a debate that goes on in the industry itself as well, whether animation is art or if it is made up of different pieces of art coming together to make a thing. And I'm not sure there's a direct answer to that question, because there are examples where people have come into the animation industry, like you, David, not having done art before, probably not even having dealt with animation before in any context, and they have made some of the most successful shows out there. When you think of things like Dexter's Lab, Cow and Chicken, and all that stuff from the 90s, that stuff was all done by a guy named Fred Siebert, who he had no animation experience. He was a businessman, really. And what happened was that what was it? I think the Warner Brothers company at the time had bought all of the Hanna-Barbera library. So this was stuff like the Flintstones and Scooby-Doo, all that stuff, right? And they told him, hey, like we just want you to run this this division or whatever. So Fred comes in, he's like, okay, I don't know anything about animation, but I'll run it, sure. And then the first thing he did really is he went to the animators that he was now in charge of. And he was like, hey, like, tell me, like, I don't know anything about this stuff, so tell me what I need to know, right, to run this thing. And they were like, well, you should bring in just people from all over the place to just pitch freely ideas for animated projects that we can make. And he said, okay, sure, that sounds like a great idea. So he had people like come in like fresh out of school, and they would pitch their stuff, and that's how things like Dexter's Lab got made, and like all these Cartoon Network shows essentially that he's essentially responsible for just by being this top level producer that kind of listened to his team. So that is all this to say really that yes, there is you can get into animation without dealing with art per se, but I would say animation itself, like if you're getting into it not knowing much about art, it's good to listen to the artists who are actually dealing with the art side of animation, because I would say animation as a whole, yes, it is an art form. It is even though it is a bunch of pieces of art coming together, they are creating like one singular piece that you can then kind of look at and admire the different pieces of, yes, but also how they come together as a whole. So I hope that answers it.
Yeah, perfectly, Jonathan. James, I think you wanted to weigh in a bit on Jonathan's response.
Well, not sorry.
Okay.
No. So I think there are time constraints. But,
yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that the idea of the non-expert becoming a great exponent of some profession. Don't forget Steve Jobs. You know who he is, right? Yeah, that guy, crazy guy, could not write a single line of code. Let me repeat that. Steve Jobs could not write in X equals 6 code. But go figure. That's all you have to say on that matter.
Going back to the gig economy, James, two questions for you. One, we keep hearing this conversation, especially in small business and entrepreneurship circles and even government, about formal versus informal sector of workers. And we know that generally when they talk about that, they're formal versus informal essentially means those paying taxes and those not paying taxes. What is your view in terms of where the gig economy should fall, whether it starts in the informal and transitions to formal, or if it starts in the formal? And also the second part of that question would be, is there need for a policy from government to influence the gig economy, or is it something that should be left to evolve on its own?
Those are two serious double-barrel questions, but let's get into it. Is there a paradigm? Is there a framework for self-employed people? So all of those professionals, doctors, lawyers, list goes on, engineers, those people who are self-employed, there is a framework. Although, I have friends of mine who are medical doctors, and sometimes I begin to laugh. I wouldn't call his name, obviously, but I know a friend of mine who's a medical doctor, and his tax returns, the tax payable on his income is rather low. And when I asked him, how is it so low? How is it lower than my income tax? He says, well, I only see 4 patients every day. I was like, right, okay. So the thing is that, and this is big in Barbados, professionals get away with murder. On the upper end of the self-employed freelance market, consultants, engineers, higher end gig workers, they make a killing. The problem, therefore, is the lower end, those what we call odd jobbers, casual workers. They must be protected. As I said, if you are a teacher or even, I don't know, there are certain types of workers who are by nature gig workers. Those of us who are in the agricultural sector, the traditional cane cutter. Believe it or not, a cane cutter is a type of gig worker, you know. He or she gets brought in certain season, they do what they have to do, and then bye-bye, see in the next life or the next cane season. They have to be protected. In other words, then, as I said, when you are paying a gig worker, there should be legislation saying a gig worker is paid the rate of a regular payroll worker. Let me repeat that. A gig worker should be paid the rate of a regular payroll worker and add on an extra percent, be it 10%, 15%, or what have you. But anyway, when I was doing some gig work in England, I was a substitute teacher in England. That's what they did. So that, for example, I was paid at 10% more the rate of what other regular teachers were paid. Because it was, Carmichael, you won't be here next week, or you might be, or who knows. So this 10% is your vacation pay. Yeah. And do with it what you wish. And that is important. That is important that we compensate, or we have in legislation monetary compensation for gig workers. I would even go further. What is one of the biggest problems with individuals getting health insurance? I'll tell you. If you are part of a group medical insurance, I am still part of the BSTU medical insurance scheme. The insurance premium for me as part of a group is a lot less. Now, if you already say, oh, I'm going to be a gig worker, I'm going to go all by myself and try to find similar quality medical coverage, it would go through the roof. Mm-hmm. Right? We have got to have a way. I don't know if government should do this. I am not sure. But there has to be a way where, like, those taxi drivers, those Uber drivers, they have no medical insurance. If they hit a rock or if they got run over by a bus, boo hoo hoo, sorry for you. There has to be a way where we can get group medical coverage for gig workers. Who will implement it? I ain't too sure.
Agreed fully. Jonathan, I want to go back to animation. And I'm going to ask James a similar question from his point of view, but how can we use animation more in both education and our daily lives? What are the applications that you see that are possible using animation? And I'm talking private sector, private citizens, public sector, and government across the gamut of society. How do you see us using it more effectively?
Sure. Well, one of the ways that we have done it, at companies that I've worked at before, is that we usually use them for like training videos, essentially. So, like when James was talking about how COVID changed everything, and once employees were coming back out after COVID, there were like a bunch of protocols now that you had to follow that you didn't have to follow before, in whatever businesses you were in. So a lot of businesses actually came to us and had us create like these little animated mock-ups, like step-by-step things to, show people how to handle the new work environment, as it were. And this is helpful because you could also just say like, well, that sounds like a lot of work. Like, why not just film some people actually doing this stuff and, and leave it at that? Well, animation is entertaining. Like at the end of the day, that's kind of like what it is. It's pretty to look at. There's some fun pictures. There's some little gags here and there. The average bland company video will probably have you like falling asleep and not paying attention. But like animation, right? Exactly, Jason. But animation is more like a little more lively. so a worker is much more likely to pay attention, and they're much more likely to remember to like retain the information, as it were. So I think things like that, like in all facets of society, we can use animation, like I guess, as a tool to kind of like teach people how to navigate like different difficulties of their lives, as it were, whether adults or children or whoever else.
Thanks for that. Now, James, gig economy again. Coming out of COVID, I'm an accountant by profession. Going into COVID, I had 2 full-time staff in addition to myself, and at least 1 or 2 what I would call part-time workers. With the decline in work at the height of COVID and the prolonged nature of COVID, it was difficult to maintain full-time employees with declining work. So coming out of COVID and having released staff and whatnot at the height of COVID, I have adopted that gig worker approach where I've actually, for the entire company, I see the entire company and what we do. So each engagement I see as a gig, whether it includes me as a full-time employee or not, because we are providing a service to the client for that particular purpose, whatever the service is, and they pay us a fee for that, and that engagement comes to an end and we move on to the next. So we may be running a few gigs simultaneously. From the worker point of view, I use a team of subcontractors or individuals between jobs or looking for part-time work and additional income to help do that work and pay them a fee where necessary. So in the context of that approach that I know I use, and I'm certain others are using it, if the future of work, for reasons like I've just outlined in my personal situation, is that the future is in terms of a gig economy and gig workers, and we will see full-time work and full-time jobs and employees becoming more and more limited or reducing. What are the implications that this can have on the rights of workers? And what is the role that the ILO may have to play in the development of this entire gig economy?
Yeah, that is a brilliant question. And well, that same little video clip from Uber, you know, where Uber was trying to say, hey, you want to gig workers, you're self-employed, don't bother us about pension plans and that facky nonsense. No, don't let them get away with it. Now, for example, as I said before, every company must have some type of administration, you know. Now, the thing about administrators, they're often what they will call batsman wicket keepers. And by that, I mean they have 2 roles. They're actually doing the job, but I mean, they're actually doing the functional area of the job. They're adding up figures and balancing books and animating, you know, salt monsters and what have you. But they also have to do administrative work. Yes. Now, the thing about a regular job and its structure is that, in theory, if you work 5 times as hard on a Monday as on a Friday, your salary remains the same, right? So the regular paradigm for a regular worker is boss man, boss lady. If you work till your parts drop off, your salary is a regular payroll salary. A gig worker is paid strictly according to productivity. Yes. Matter of fact, most of us here know that if you got some workmen building a house for you, what is the better type? Job work or day work? Day work, right? Because why? If you say, look, your job is to build a house or build a part of a house, we will pay you for that. What does the gig worker do? Because that is a gig worker, basically. He will run through that house in a hurry. The thing is, I believe it is impossible for most companies, this is just my opinion, it is not possible for most companies to be totally gig. As a matter of fact, Mr. Simpson, I don't want to inquire into your business, but as the boss, as the titular head of your company, I suspect that you will pay yourself a regular salary? I may be wrong. I don't, please don't answer that question. But there is a need for regular workers to be given what we can call the presumption of regularity, right? Job security is very important. How do I build my house? How do I plan how do I get my new car? Unless there is job security, unless I know that X amount of money is coming in at the end of every month. The trick is to find the balance.
So before we wrap, so let me share in general terms my approach to it, because I take your point and I believe that you're advocating that even though we use gig workers and we create a gig economy, that there must still be fairness and a strong degree of reasonableness in terms of how we treat to that employee and their well-being. So my approach is, as I said, if we treat each engagement with a client as a gig, what we do is there's a fee that we charge the client for that gig. Now the contract with the gig worker, what I do is, here is based on the fee we charge the client for the gig and the hours of work required and so on, here is the fee that you will be paid. However, if you can complete your task efficiently, it means that the gig becomes more profitable and we turn around and we pay you a percentage of the profit as on top of what you are being retained to do. So from where I sit, I see the contract with the gig worker as being more rewarding to them than just the standard employee contract where you're susceptible to get a monthly fixed salary. And as it goes in our industry, even if you work overtime, your monthly fixed salary is still that, and you may get a one-time annual bonus or whatever. So I see that as being more motivating to the gig worker, because yes, I have the freedom to manage my time and get this job done. But if I do it efficiently, my contractor's gig becomes more profitable and he is paying me an additional profit on the basis of that. So again, what I pay as a percentage of the contract for you to do the work is probably better than a salary, because I am determining what you will be paid off the top based on the fee quoted. I'm not deducting any costs of running the engagement or overhead costs before telling you what your fee is a percentage of the gross fee to the client, right? So that's how I do that. Now, naturally for me, at least half of my gig workers are otherwise employed. So they're doing this part-time, and that otherwise employed is either as an employee or they have their own businesses doing similar work and I'm subcontracting stuff to them. Right. But I think the point that you're making there is that we can't assume that gig is informal and they don't have rights, so there's not a certain benchmark that we must meet in terms of the relationship that we have. So let me
even go further. If you are a cane cutter, if you pull weeds, you have a right to a pension when you get old and rickety. Yeah. And it's for advanced self-interest, because I'm too far from that myself right now. Yeah. So when you are in a state where you can't pull weeds no more, when you are in a state where your health begins to deteriorate because old age is not a kind bedfellow, when you are at that age in life, your pension plan must be there, regardless of your station in life. Why can't cane cutters go on vacation? And therefore plan their salary, plan their income, so that they know that I don't get any work in the off season. That must be treated as my vacation money. In Barbados, they're historically ignored. You just let them drop dead, and that's that. We have to redress this.
So my final question to both of you, and we can use it as your wrap-up comments as well. What advice would you give to the Ministry of Education or to secondary or primary school principals as to how we can lay the foundation in the school system for both the gig economy and animation as an industry? So Jonathan, you can go first, and then we'll wrap up with James.
Okay. I suppose in terms of, and I'll speak to both animation and the gig economy to, you know, to a certain degree, because they're so intertwined, right? It's interesting because when I was going to school, obviously, you know, back in Cape Person days, it was more like, you know, like they always told you, like, you gotta do well here, you gotta go to college, then, you know, you go there in the working world, you get a job. You know, pitching entrepreneurship wasn't necessarily like a big thing, right? And even knowing that I wanted to do animation at the time, I was still very much thinking of it as I wasn't thinking of it as a gig at all. I was thinking like, okay, I go to animation school and I head to like the United States or wherever else, and I get hired at a studio and that's where I'll stay and I'll get a pension and blah, blah, blah. Only to find out that that's not, you know, that's not a thing, right? It's really more of like, you are, like James was saying, you're a mercenary. You're paid to do this one show or a season of a show even. And then the studio is like, okay, bye. And you go and try to find your next thing based on kind of your reputation. So I think it would be good to instill our young people with, I guess, a bit more variety of thought, right? Because in a way, we're probably still telling them a lot of the same things. We're probably still telling them, you know, do well in school here, and so that you can get into a good college, and so that you can get a good job. And it's more about being a lot more flexible. Again, you know, everyone learns in different ways as well, right? Not everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, and not everyone is cut out to, or some people are just more inclined to, you know, doing like a very specific job, right? So I would say if we can encourage like children to, like what I was saying in my video, find the space where they would like to be, right? So not even just like an animator in general, but what part of animation would you like to do, or would you even, what part of art would you like to get into, and then try to foster, like if we can make some programs that would help foster like, or show children how they can actually benefit in life from doing those gigs, right? Like in the working world, once we get outside of the school system, and outside of just doing a traditional 9 to 5, then we would have, I guess, like at least a good starting point for children coming up today, for sure.
Thanks, Jonathan. James, over to you.
You know what is amazing? Caribbean people, Barbadian people, we are giggers by nature. How many teachers do you know that they only teach 9 to 5? How many teachers you know don't on the Saturday morning, not Sunday, Sundays for church, but on a Saturday morning, they're breaking down the place for private lessons? Oh my, matter of fact, I know certain teachers who, seriously, their salaries their income from private lessons can almost rival their regular salaries. So not really. And as you said, Mr. Simpson, David, that almost all of your gig workers have other gigs going. Yes. So we in the Caribbean, we are, I say it again, we are natural giggers. We are, even though we have regular, for example, I am sure even members of parliament got a little chicken farm, you know, stuff like that. So we are naturally at that. We are naturally people, as my father used to say, government must know about some of your income, but not all. That is a gig mentality right there. Furthermore, again, to go back to the basis of education. How many of us in primary school, secondary school, college, wherever, how many of us have ever studied, something that sounds like a really stupid thing, how to fill in your income tax forms? How do you maximize your tax breaks? You know what the biggest problem I have? Well, not in the Bahamas because they don't have any income tax. When I was in Barbados, the thing that I dreaded, the thing that I'll probably pay you, Mr. Simpson, get money for. I will go, hold up on this, hold up on my tax returns, because I can't deal with that.
Yeah.
Because I've never been taught to do that. And worse yet, the thing about education is education imparts not only knowledge, education imparts an attitude, right? I got my degree. I ain't got to worry about anything like gigging, even though we do it. And I should not be dirtying my hands with money. Matter of fact, do you remember, you may not know this, but in the House of Parliament in Barbados, it was probably in the 19th century, a Caucasian parliamentarian said, my brothers, you all are very afraid that the Black people are becoming educated. We should encourage this. And why is that? Let them be white collar workers. We will keep the commercial side to us. Let them learn how to make money and buy our bread and our provisions. And you know what? It's still happening. So the idea of how do you work your income tax laws? For example, what is a tax structure? What does it do? How do you appeal in case you think you're being unfairly treated? That is important. And that, believe me, is what happens at law school. Again, I said, it happens already, but it doesn't happen to most of us. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, gentlemen. Very insightful, very informative, and I know we could continue this for the rest of the day, but we are constrained by time. I'll just close with a comment from YouTube which says, whether gig or not, the trend is clearly towards reward, hiring or firing based on performance. So I think that's another element in there as well. So thanks again for your participation and for your contributions and original presentations, and wish you all a good remainder of the day.
Thank you.
Back to our MC, you hear?
Thank you, David, and thank you, James and Jonathan. And thanks for bringing in that comment from the YouTube chat, because at this time, we're going to open the virtual floor to some of the feedback we'll be receiving from our audience. So as you mentioned that comment just now, we've also seen a comment saying that animation and the creative arts in general, we need to understand this is a gold mine waiting to be exploited. Barbados has amazing creative talent, and we must start exporting and earning for it. Another comment says, true educational excellence mandates a mind shift. Education is structured to get a job, but we must inspire our youth and ourselves to tap into creativity to create opportunities which are unlimited. Now, please, if you have any additional thoughts to share at this time, please post them in the YouTube chat. And in the meantime, I'll invite Sharon back to the mic to share comments and questions that have been submitted by students. As we get our open mic session. Sharon, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the question was, where do we expect to see the classroom in 10 to 20 years? And the first one that is here is, I expect in 10 to 20 years that technology will be greatly intertwined into the way that information is delivered. When I left secondary school, tablets and laptops were becoming relatively common and acceptable. Now with COVID, they are widely used, along with online educational platforms. The future may see widespread usage of technology provided by schools and by the ministry, but with enhanced technology. This may be robots to help in science labs, and recording tech in every classroom to make sure students who are absent from the classroom can still access lessons. Next, we have, I also think students would have more say in their education, as Annalena spoke of in Sweden. This conference, especially yesterday, where many students contributed, is a great start of this for Barbados. And next we have, I expect content taught in the classroom will change to reflect the changes in the economy. For example, teachers may utilize social platforms like TikTok or Instagram to complete coursework in classes like business studies or economics, familiarizing students with how to use these platforms for more than fun, but to elevate themselves in a beneficial way. That's all I have for now.
Excellent, thank you. And for those of us who are with us live, please feel free to weigh in on the open mic question, which, as Sharon said, is what will the classroom look like in 10 to 15 years in your view? What would the ideal classroom setting or teaching environment be? This question is open to any of our panelists or any of our audience here as well.
If I may,
please do.
I'm asking all of you students, be honest with me. Be honest with me. How many of you have set up, especially at the university level, you set up little WhatsApp groups for your courses? You know, Chemistry 101 WhatsApp group. Yeah, you've done it. You've done it. You've done it. I know you have. I have done it myself. So therefore, WhatsApp has become a very powerful tool of learning. And it's amazing to me because I always thought when I first joined WhatsApp, oh, this is something just to go and pass the time. I know of professors at the university where I teach where they release their marks and they set exercises via WhatsApp. It's a bit of a controversy because it will violate university policy. Because of course, any school will say, or any university, the official means of communication is the school's email or what have you. So when you release official information on WhatsApp, it can get a little bit tricky. Furthermore, in Dubai, this is a bit crazy, there are WhatsApp sub-applications. So there are applications within WhatsApp where you will get a little WhatsApp notification says, your parcel, especially Uber Eats, your pizza is on its way. Send a pin, not a pin, it's called what again? No, the geographical map locator.
Yes, location pin. That's
the location. That's right. That's right. Send a location pin right now, and let not that food get cold. So already we are seeing the commercialization of WhatsApp and the academication. I don't know what that was. And the academic whatever it is of WhatsApp. Now the trick is to regulate the industry. Social platforms were primarily meant for casual activities. If we are going to move towards a situation where we are having official activities, oh my God, this has to be regulated. And by the way, in academia, there is some gigging of academia. Have you heard of micro credentials?
Yes.
That's a bit of gigging. And why is that? Okay, so micro credentials basically state that, you know, so you're gonna get some fella like me, some idiot who spent too long at university, you know, learn a lot of irrelevant stuff. How many angels can dance on the head of a pin? And what the employer wants is a skill. So for example, I did a course on Java programming where I learned lots of stuff, which was very nice for a coffee table, our coffee table discussion. But there were some skills that I did not learn. No, by the way, Germany is like this. Germany, the idea of a polytechnic in Germany is a very serious one. For example, if you were an automobile designer and you got a degree in automobile design from Cambridge, Mercedes-Benz would laugh at you and say, please, go to a polytechnic, many skills. And get your hands dirty with designing a car, please, before you come and look for us. So what I have to say here is this. Using social platforms as a tool of instruction and commercialization, it's already happening. It must be regulated. Secondly, think about credentialing. Employers want practical skills. The idea of doing a full degree? I don't know.
They want to know that people are ready to hit the ground running.
This is it. No, but anyway, that's a bit of a, because but anyway, a university is supposed to train the mind. In fact, the place to learn that type of get ready to go skills, that should be a polytechnic. But it's just that polytechnics are not prestigious. Samuel Jackman is not as prestigious as, UE. Shouldn't be the case.
See, Michelle Cave has come on camera to share with us some recommendations on this question about what the classroom could look like in 10 to 15 years. Please
yes, good afternoon, Yahara. Thank you so much. A good digital infrastructure should potentially be present at all schools, and that internet should definitely be paid by the Barbados Light and Power or the state, not the school. The second, is a good education in classrooms available for all ages. So people that go to the schools and people that don't go to the schools, they should have access to the classrooms. And the third one is the socialization aspect of schools must be retained and accentuated, as the rest of children's lives will be dominated by computerization. Fourth one, there will no longer be education officers. They will be replaced by what I liked from Anna Lena's conversation, directors of education, who will be extremely hands-on with both principals and teachers. And the fifth one, like Sweden, our teachers will be knowledge providers rather than judges, as they are seriously seen as now. The sixth one, students will be leaving school as problem solvers, innovative thinkers, outfitted with grit and confidence. And given the emerging nature of the gig economy, where teachers can actually create scenarios in school that will direct children's minds towards this. All right, thanks so much, Yahara.
But before you go, could you elaborate a bit more on that second point you made about people having access to the classrooms to the classes who are not students? Could you elaborate a bit more?
Yes, because there's very little security in primary schools and secondary schools, there isn't a lot of use by the general public or in adult education of the schools, so of potential classes. So there needs to be some thought put into how we're going to allow anybody that needs to learn something, they need to access the schools, but the schools will need to be secured. And the principals do not often appreciate everyone coming in without security.
Yeah.
Without securing the classrooms, without securing the schools.
Excellent, thank you. And you're getting support from the YouTube chat on having the reliable internet for the classroom, because in this person's opinion, the ideal classroom will be hybrid, will be mixed and virtual. So we need to ensure that the infrastructure exists to facilitate this. David?
Yeah, I actually wanted to say here that my view on the question is that I think the classroom as we know it today will essentially disappear in the next 10 to 15 years. The physical space may remain, but I think how we use that physical space will change. I envision that a lot of the learning will happen remotely or through those WhatsApp groups or using technology. But what we may have, which is what I think is missing now at secondary and tertiary for sure, is coming together in the physical classroom space now for the application of learning in real life scenarios so that we can have graduates that are far more ready for traditional work environment, evolving industries and sectors, or even the gig economy as we spoke of earlier. So I think the structures will remain, but how they are used will radically change. And all of that will be going hand in hand with our economic, national and social development.
But what could this mean for the socialization aspect of schools that we find to be so important for students, for young people?
The truth is, in my opinion, I believe that young people are socializing by social media and all of these various apps. And they socialize outside of school when they go out to do their different things. They socialize in the gyms, at parties, at wherever they go. So I think I would use the word substitute rather than replace. I think how they currently socialize will be substituted with evolving methods and will not be bound to the school environment. And just as an example, when COVID started, my daughter was in second form, I believe. And for that first term of COVID, the form teacher ensured that he set aside a time online for them to just come on and socialize. And he facilitated them discussing anything at all. And he would only intervene to make sure the conversation didn't go in any direction it shouldn't. But they were free to discuss anything they wanted, and it was not restricted to schoolwork or anything academic. It was, where did you go last weekend? What did you do? What are your interests? And he engaged them as well. So I make that point to say that is already the start of their socialization, moving away from the physical school. I think what we saw with COVID is that because there was not an acceleration of other methods to facilitate that socialization, the children started to miss the physical attachment to the school plan. But 10, 15 years down the road, I think all of that will be addressed, and that socialization will not be as big an issue as we may see it to be today.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to invite one more comment on the open mic before I hand over back to David again to close us out on the final panel. We are running a bit against the clock. So if there are no further comments at this time, okay, I'll hand back over to you, David, to take us into our final panel with takeaways. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I believe the members of this panel are to be the principals of the Harrison College and Queen's College, and also Miss Janice Fournillier, who I see on already. Sure, can we confirm if Dr. Brown and Miss Wade are on?
Please let me say that they did have some technical difficulties with joining us, so they won't be able to be part of the panel, but we'll move into get our feedback from our other panelists here today.
Right, so in that regard then, I will ask James to stay on, and anybody else who is on that wishes to contribute, please feel free to do so. So we're supposed to be wrapping up. We've had what I believe is a productive 2.5 days of discussion, and in both instances, we've gone a bit over time, so I think that means the content and the focus was rich. Yesterday, we heard about financial literacy from the students from Harrison College. We looked at, Professor Janice spoke to us about education for all, myth or reality. We had the discussion on robotics and entrepreneurship. And then, of course, we had that research presentation by the QC students on society, the economy, and education. And our keynote speaker spoke on the role of STEM education and reform. And of course, today we've spoken about education and schooling and the key ingredients for tomorrow's successful school and nation. And we just heard about animation and exploring the value of the gig economy. And of course, we also heard in the open mic question about what the classroom will look like in the next 10 to 15 years. So all of these things considered, and remembering that our focus, our theme for the event was education for the future Barbados in the 21st century and beyond, I want to first invite Professor Fournillier from Georgia State University to share some wrap-up comments and closing remarks with us. I'll then invite James to do the same, and anyone else who wants to give us a 1 to 2 minute wrap up. And then I understand there are also some closeout videos that will be played as well. So Professor, if you can get us started, please.
Okay, thank you, David. Can you hear me?
Hearing you well.
Good morning and good afternoon, whatever your time is, wherever you are. First, let me just say congratulations to the organizers on just a wonderful and important event, because like I say, nothing for them without them. So if we are preparing and looking at education for the future, we can't have it without them. So I want to really thank the students from both schools who did what I thought was excellent presentations in terms of the research that they did and the actual presentation of the material and the questions that they asked, whether they were given it by others or whatever. And if teachers help them, I want to also thank the teachers, because a lot of times we forget what goes into creating what happens, the final product. We look at the final product, but we forget what happens behind the scene to allow that product to become a reality. So I want to say thank you to them and congratulations to the students and the organizers. I think we touched on a lot of very key and important issues related to education for the future. During the presentation itself, I sent a note to the somebody in education saying, you know what, this is fabulous, but you know what, I want this to be for all students in Barbados. I want this as a model for what we can do with our students in other school areas so they don't feel, again, marginalized. And if we give them, I remember as a secondary school teacher training students for what we used to call debates, student debates. But this kind of conference and conversation where the voice of the student comes in. And so I go back to whole youth involvement and leadership in all aspects of system design and delivery. And this to me is the start of that, where you're actually having youth involvement, not just in, well, what we experience, but what they are thinking can be a good design. I come back to teacher training and this whole use of online learning, because I teach online and I was teaching online before COVID. So I was using all the things, all the gadgets, all the things before, but I don't know if we realize it came upon us. And so teachers may not have been adequately prepared for this pandemic. And so what research, I ask, are we doing on what teachers did as a result of that, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel the next time something big like this comes up? What did teachers do? We may not have the facilities and the experience and the expertise and the finance that Sweden has, but we have other local knowledges and technologies and local animators and local experts who can give to us the things we need. So we need to draw on those local resources. That's why I say we need to give our students the local knowledge. Yes, they need the global knowledge, but what kind of society, what kind of region do we have? And how is our agenda set up to meet the needs of the region, given the limitations that we may have? And we don't only have limitations, we have strengths. So this is our country. This is our community. What do we have? And I want us to include, make sure the students have that local knowledge. What do we have? How can we build on what we have so that education becomes a reality for all, and not just education in the K-12, but education in the non-school context. So I have the experience of having worked in Cardinal mass camps to collect data on learning and teaching and thinking science is going on in there, math is going on in there, art is going on in there. And some of these people are the same people that the examination system said were failures. When you get in the non-school, for me, the Carnival Mass Camp is the ideal school where each person is teaching each person, and we have really collaborative learning. and we have experiential learning, and we have all those things that we are seeing and hearing about happening right there. But we neglect that, and we try to get Eurocentric frames to frame what we should be doing. When I'm saying, come on, we have our own thing. Can we take that, learn from it, build on it, get our youth to be aware of it, and have them participate fully in not just the end product, but right through the entire system. And as an elementary school teacher, I taught my infants money, right? I was like, so they're learning what is a cent? What's 2 cents? How do I put these 2 pieces together and get $1 or 4 pieces? And so and what are you buying today? Did you bring lunch? Are you buying lunch? If you brought lunch, so you start teaching financial literacy, not as a CXC subject, but you have something that moves throughout the system. And okay, you have the parents who may not know. So let's bring the parents in. Let's show them what we are teaching their children. Let's make them a part of the system. So we have something more holistic and more regional in terms of what we have. We have the fishing industry, we have water. What are we doing there? How is our engineering and whatever getting people ready? When I go to where I like to go to get my fish, you know, can they, what kind of technology is needed to allow that, you know, us to build what we have and not try to take what somebody else, we can learn from them, but where is our thing? And so I really want to thank the organizers for this, what I say is an inaugural kind of movement towards bringing youth together and bringing it with adults. And so we're not telling them they're working with us, and collaboratively, we can really do something so that these are the people in whose hands the education will be. We are on our way out, they are on their way in. So let's really make them part of the process and not just talk down to them. Thank you.
You're on mute there, David. Almost made it to the end.
Yeah, very well said, Professor. Thanks for that. James, before I come to you, I want to invite Sharon Gittins just to give us a few comments in our wrap up. So Sharon, please go ahead.
Thank you, David. There's so much information that can be attained by looking nationally, regionally, and extra-regionally while applying this information to ourselves. We can use all the information learned in yesterday's and today's session to enhance ourselves, our classroom, our economy. This information is applicable to each and every one of us, no matter our job, no matter our location. For example, we learned from Harrison College yesterday the importance of financial literacy. As family members, myself, a daughter, sons, parents, cousins, we can aim to increase our personal financial literacy and that of others to better ourselves and our future generations. But that's just one area. We can leave here by combining much of the information to impact and apply specifically to our society. Like Professor Fournillier just said, we have our own thing. By combining advantages of an entrepreneurial spirit, like Donna Every mentioned yesterday when she spoke about entrepreneurship in schools, with knowledge of the gig economy that James Carmichael just addressed, we can see how we can be able to uniquely navigate the world, or our world of work, how we can use this knowledge to create jobs. We also had Dr. Curtis speak on robotics, specifically social robots, and the positive influences of us having social robots with a Bajan accent. We also can see how impactful we can be regardless of our situation as people from a small island. Jonathan Norgrove, for example, who spoke on animation and the intricacies of it, spoke of how the final product of Rick and Morty received some input, direct or indirect, from Barbados. Understanding that teaching can be an export, as Annalena Olsen touched on when she spoke about her experience providing remote learning in Sweden, we can look into our products and services that we export. Yesterday, Professor Cardinal Warde touched on how the sun, sea, and sand isn't enough, as he spoke about STEM education reform and STEM integration into schools in the future. We need to add to our exports. So where do we go from here in terms of officially implementing change in Barbados? What steps can we take? We can raise these ideas and discussions with policymakers. Educators who are watching, approach your superiors, conduct more research, use areas in your teaching where there's some flexibility to apply the tools and strategies that some of our speakers, like Annalie Olsen and John Fo, may have mentioned, the latter of whom spoke of his experience teaching in the UK, Jamaica, Malaysia, Singapore, Zimbabwe, and China. Yesterday, the Honorable Ms. Kay McConney, Minister of Education, Chief Education Officer Dr. Ramona Archer Bradshaw were present and were able, and those are persons who are able to make direct changes. Our moderator himself, David Simpson, also spoke to advising the ministry on how to help schools with financial literacy. We need to consistently have these conversations and welcome discussion where experienced persons and those who are or may be directly influenced by those changes can make informed comments and suggestions. Those of you watching live on YouTube, I've been reading your comments and can see the interest and enthusiasm that you all have. Continue to ask, continue to question, continue to comment. Even in situations where the forum may not be as formal, our words and actions can plant seeds in every single context. Having the students make their voice heard is very important, as Professor Fournillier also spoke about yesterday in her presentation, Education for All, Myth or Reality. Yesterday, we had students from Harrison College speak on financial literacy, and Queen's College present on society, the economy, and how we can prepare ourselves. They gave these presentations to us, and students themselves also asked and provided answers to these questions. Having student-led conferences, similar to those in Sweden, we can have students not only have a say, but have a significant responsibility in their education and ultimately their future. So this first HCQC Alumni Network Conference on Education for the Future is just a start, but an impactful start to propel us all as change makers to diversify and enhance our society. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Sharon. James, anything you want to add to those wrap-up comments before I summarize as well?
I will say that this has been really an eye-opener. I am so sad to say and to confess with some repentance that I'm an old fogey. I came back in the days when children were seen and not heard. And unfortunately, that has stayed with me. The idea, even when it was first approached by President, Miss Mary Simmons, when she told me this would be a student-led conference, I was like, what? Happy nonsense. I am so sorry, but there it is. In fact, this is a grassroots academic program. I mean, it's a grassroots move, almost like the Russian Revolution or what it should have been, that the customer is king. I once had a entrepreneur, a caterer, who said, if a customer wants a four-legged chicken, take 2 drumsticks, stick it in the chicken breast, and make it a four-legged chicken. Very often, we in the Caribbean, we are very top-down. There's a comment there in one of the chat boxes. That's part of our, I suppose, our British heritage too. The king and the queen do everything, and the rest follow. But the customer is king, and the revolution has to be led by the end users, the students, and their word must be respected. And I like Professor Fournillier's comment that, and it never occurred to me that all stakeholders must be involved. If you got some parents who don't have a clue about what's going on, like me, drag them in. Sorry, I have misspoken. Invite them in, because what is education? And education is not training. Let me repeat that. Education is not training. Education, the word comes from educare, or the building of the mind. A QC girl or an HC girl may sit the same O levels as anybody else. A Cambridge fella or Cambridge Don may learn the same physics and maths. It's their mental attitude, their mindset. You have got to train a people and a population that have the mindset. I would hate to say this, but one of the reasons why, let's say, the USA has achieved so much isn't because they have genetically superior peoples. Face it, people, what is so special about KFC or Burger King? You mean to tell me we cannot make chicken in Barbados? Of course we can make chicken in Barbados. But what happens is that the American mindset, as a matter of fact, Colonel Sanders, when he created his secret recipe, said, when he was told, you have great success, sir, we have taken Kentucky by storm. Kentucky is ours for fast food. We are moving on to the neighboring southern states. Colonel Sanders was at the age of 81. What about Russia? Like, fellas, of course you have Kentucky. We're going big. I find that Caribbean people in general, we do not have the idea or a mindset of this is an international product. Yes. Why is it that cheddar cheese, cheddar, what we call rat cheese? Cheddar cheese is trademark. What is champagne? Champagne is sparkling wine. That's all it is. No. Champagne is sparkling wine that must be made in the Champagne region of France. What trademarks do we have in the Caribbean? Sea Island cotton should be an exclusive trademark. Where is it at? We have to really, the Caribbean has a product, Purple Heartwood in Guyana, cannot be attacked by termites. Why is that not a big thing in America and other places? We have trees that cannot be attacked by termites. The termite teeth drop out. Sorry for my vision there. But it's no big thing. You know, it's just one of these things there. That has to change. We have something to offer. Let's make it work. Let us establish our place on the world scenario. Thanks very much, Mr. Simpson.
Thank you very much, James. So as I intro the videos, I just want to summarize what I think everyone has said in 4 key words, which would be collaborate, first of all, which is how we got to this point in terms of listening to our students, but there are other stakeholders who are critical to our future developments in education that we will need to collaborate with. What I took most from Professor was the innovation approach, because she said we can't essentially wholesale adopt what has come from outside. We can build out our own methodology. What and where is our thing, as she put it. So I think that innovation is critical, and I have my own affiliations with Trinidad professors, so I've seen the mass camps and the Pioneer in full flight. So I know what you mean in terms of that collaborative learning and passing on skill sets and knowledge without sitting in a classroom. So I fully support that approach as well. I think Sharon is telling us we need to advocate, and one of the outcomes of this process needs to be that all of our discussions, our deliberations need to be summarized and submitted to the Ministry of Education. I think we captured the attention of the Minister and the Chief yesterday, and we need to capitalize on that. And as we review what we've done in this first installment of what I hope is an annual event, that we can see how we can expand and include more students and more schools next year, even if it's still driven by HTQC, but also possibly in association with the ministry, so that we can start to have a movement that supports the future development of our educational policy and mechanisms. And finally, export, I think, is critical to export our knowledge based on what we're doing, but we need to be also training our students and young people to look outwards, to take what they have learned, their knowledge, their skills, their products, services beyond the shores of Barbados and the region. Professor Janice has Trinidadian roots, but she's at Georgia State. Others that presented may have Caribbean roots, but they have spread their wings, and we need to make sure in the new world that we encourage our students to do the same. So thank you very much for your closing comments, and we will view those videos now, and then our MC will close us out. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation.
Today, I attended a very informative conference about education reform in Barbados and the Caribbean at large, and I learned a lot about not only financial literacy, which my school did a presentation on, but also how education has an effect on our economy and our society. I learned about entrepreneurship, how entrepreneurship can benefit us as young people, and Barbados at large, and the Caribbean at large as well, and also about robotics and other interesting subjects that we can include in our curriculum.
What I learned today, to begin, there was a really excellent presentation by the Harrison College students on financial literacy and education. I learned about the importance of financial literacy, the deficit that there is in the Caribbean and in Barbados specifically. I also learned about their recommendations on how it can be implemented into the curriculum and into our daily lives. There was also a very informative workshop on equity in education, and I thought that was really interesting because as students of Queen's College and Harrison College, we would be considered to be the ones that have a luckier outlook on education, and I thought that it was interesting to hear her thoughts on equity in education in the Caribbean and how we can work to make it better for everyone around the Caribbean. And then there was the presentation by the Queen's College students on society, culture, and education, how do we prepare. There were some very salient points about co-op programs which allow students to get advice on careers that they can go into that would help benefit the Caribbean economies, including Barbados, and how we can better the world moving forward. And that's what I learned.
Whether that be from primary school, we learning it from class 1 all the way to 3rd form. I believe that should be an idea that we look into developing into, and in order for the youth of tomorrow to move forward, they have to be aware of what exactly it is that is needed in the future. So the earlier we get the capabilities to be able to fully understand what it is that is needed, we need to start from young.
What do you think about the question that was asked of Professor Warde? The balance between STEM and the arts.
I believe that there should be a balance, because the arts and crafts is a very rich part of our culture, and in order to be who we are as a Caribbean society, we should really develop that art side of it, but also manage the business aspects of it.
So today, what I really paid attention to was HC's presentation on financial literacy, and I agreed with most of their key points, and I agree that it should be integrated into our subjects at school. If not, it's as its own subject, it should be integrated into the different subjects and we learn the different aspects of it. I also believe that with QC's presentation that we do need to find a way to incorporate technology more into our curriculum and have more facilities that, because technology is a big part of our world now, and I do believe that it needs to be incorporated more into school, as it will help us further education and give us access to more information overall, and I feel like that is really a way forward. Yeah.
Voice This time, I just simply want to move the vote of thanks for the many people and organizations that have contributed to making this conference not just a reality, but a success. We want to thank the organizing committee consisting of Michelle Daniel as chair and comprising Lilia Toppin, who is currently incapacitated, unfortunately, Laura Nichols, Rochelle Franklin, Kathy Daniel, Carl Appowitz, Michelle Cave, and Sharon Gittins. Our thanks also go to the steering committee of the HCQC Alumni Network, chaired by Mary Simmons. We also thank our ever faithful production company, Flix Photography, and our sponsors, OSI, Southpaw Graphics, Island Advantage Career Coach, and Courts Barbados Limited. We thank the principals of our two schools for their untiring support over the last 2 years, Dr. David Brown and Ms. Juanita Wade. We also thank our presenters for the excellent work that they did, starting with our two schools that allowed us to get the voices of the youth involved in the conference, and also to those who captured their voices for that we just heard at the end of our session. A big thank you to all of our speakers and presenters over both days who've joined us as panelists, presenters, speakers. Our MC for the first day, Joel Manning, must be lauded for his role in energizing the day's proceedings. Kudos go out as well to our masterful moderator on both days, David Simpson. We thank them for donating their time. We cannot forget all the staff and ancillary team members of Queen's College who assisted with setting up the hall for yesterday's hybrid discussions. And to all those who time does not permit me to name individually, please know that your contribution is highly appreciated. Finally, we thank you, the approximately 250 people who have engaged and contributed to our discussions over the last 2 days. After much fulsome and thought-provoking conversation, we have come to the end of the HCQC Alumni Network's inaugural conference on the future of education. Please remember to revisit and share the conference recordings on YouTube, which will be shared to all of our participants. It has been a pleasure serving as your Master of Ceremonies today, and my final task is to simply wish all of you a very wonderful day. Goodbye.
Education, education, this is the foundation. Our rising population needs sound education to be recognized anywhere you go. Have your certificate to show